during the storefront theater days, periodically I had the urge to do something that wasn't just out of my imagination, but that had something to had some social significance, something that I would sort of give back to. Our artists continue to feel this way, that they just can't trust themselves unless they're doing something that has some kind of social value. And so this was a piece where I wanted to demonstrate societal inequities to people just passing on the sidewalk, as though they didn't know these things already, as though the poor aren't hungry. I wanted to show, to demonstrate visually how money accrued for an hour's worth of someone's time. And I wanted to get different people who made a lot more and less money than each other, and then above everybody's head there'd be a clock, and they'd just sit in my window, and above their head, clock, and I'd have the mechanism adjusted so that it would move at a rate according to how much money they made. And everybody could see the dollars accumulating, or how slow they were, how fast they were, and then I would pay them. That was going to be my project. And I never actually did this project, and I'll explain why I canceled in a moment. I was going to call this piece Money, and first person I invited was my next door neighbor, Mrs. Critch. I don't recall her first name, and she was sequestered to a wheelchair by, I think it was arthritis, and she just had this ramp added to the front of her house at the time with the help of government money. And I used to meet her doctor at the foot of the ramp, coincidentally, and I invited him. His name was Ordell, last name started with a W, Ordell W, and to my knowledge, I like to think of him this way. I think he was the last, this is my imagination, but it could have been, he was the last internist to make house calls in the Midwest. And I invited a Ms. Tween, my postman, and she was dynamite. She was a real looker. And this is, in my recollection, when I bring her to mind, she dazzles me. And I can see her up there. This one little bit of film clip that's in my mind still, and I see Miss Tween parading back and forth down my block, and she's wearing post office issue gray shorts, and they fit her great. She looks terrific. And I invited this electrician, well, it wasn't my electrician, and I found him in my basement one day when I descended into the gloom seeking a shovel. There's this guy, and he, I didn't ask his, my name's Samson, and well, I asked him, why are you in my basement? He explained that it was at my wife of that time's request, and she was, as I recall, a furious ceramicist, and she wanted to have our electric service upgraded to accommodate this new kiln. And lastly, I invited the owner of a modest chain of discount furniture stores, Mr. O. Meyers, a man who claimed me as a son until one day, 3 years after he remarried this woman. What was her name? Electra. Of course, that's not her real name. Well, after he married this woman 3 years later, Dad and we fell out. And we remained fallen out until shortly before his death, which was the time I invited him to join me to do my art project, Money. And I explained to Dad what I already explained to you, that all they had to do was, go sit in the window, or in Miss Critch's case, she could sit down for an hour, and we'd watch the money accumulate, and I would pay him. And Father kind of was incredulous when I said, he wanted to know how I was going to come up with the cash to do that, boy. Well, I told him that I had this grant, and Father was, what's the word, incredulous. And he was wondering, and I think this now, if it was going on Dad's mind, behind that face, behind that cigar, if somehow, I don't know how, somehow his money had gone into the pocket of the granting institution, and that once again, albeit in this circuitous way, he would be subsidizing for my, this is what he said, my fooling around. There you go again, which he was, semi-correctly encapsulated me. Well, after I explained my idea to Miss Critch, she demurred and carefully explained slowly that beyond Social Security check, she had no income, and therefore her clock, her time was, she had no monetary value. Her clock would go real slow, and Mrs. Critch, this is me explaining to her now. Mrs. Critch, that's the point. I said, that's the point, you know. Or part of, that was part of my point. That was the part that I could speak. Now, there's always a part of all work that you can't say, you know. You know, it evades language. And I continue to believe, I still believe this, that if you could totally explain what you're doing, you're not doing enough to make art. Or you're just fooling yourself, which is what I think I was doing. I was thinking about it now. I suspect that the truth of this piece, the money piece, the truth of it, the real starting motivation was Dad, I think, and how through art I could do this end run around Electra, you know, and reconnect with the old man. And we were all set to go. Everybody's there. Mrs. Critch is seated in a wheelchair. The wheelchairs are locked when Dr. Ordell W. gets a phone call suddenly, and he's called away to perform. This is him saying, I have to go perform an emergency, super painful neck boil procedure in my office. Yeah, something like that. Well, this is what I think. I think that Ordell W.'s sudden departure was stage fright. That's what I think. And the call I thought was prearranged. I didn't think this then, but I do now. But by the time the schedules of everybody could be realigned, Dad had died, which dampened my enthusiasm to make visible to those who already knew too well social inequities, you know, and they didn't need further evidence from me anyway. Well, the thing that happened that was positive, call it fallout of this piece, was that from then on, I was on a first name basis with Toby Tween